It's the morning after the night before, and I'm reporting on round 9, the penultimate round of Norway chess. So going into this round, Richard Rapport was leading by a very slender margin. He drew very quickly against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and that meant that if Carlsen could win, then he would actually leapfrog over Rapport. So let's have a look at this game. Magnus Carlsen against Sergey Karjakin. This was incredibly tense. Carlsen with the white pieces. And it's a Spanish, and it's the Berlin variation. And the way that Carlsen played this opening, it had a feel that he was kind of improvising. You know, he wasn't playing down 15 moves of theory. And I think that might have something to do with the World Championship match coming up. I don't think he wants to reveal anything too significant against the Berlin, which might well be one of the battlegrounds in the match. So he's playing something that looks to me like, as I said, he's improvising like a sideline basically. Because I don't think he gets very much out of this at all. So here Carlsen went for b4. I think if he goes for d4, then after this exchange, basically I think there's too much pressure on white centre here. So b4 and bishop back. If he plays bishop f8, actually that leaves the knight protecting the pawn on e5. But it's not a great place for the knight. It's going to take time for black to play g6, bishop g7 to protect this one. So that's why Karjakin plays the bishop back to d6, protecting the pawn on e5. And that means that this knight is now free to spin round. It's coming around to g6. So knight d2 and knight g6. Now the bishop is free to retreat to get out of the clutches of the knight on c4. And Carlsen decided to exchange it off. Let's just have a quick look. If a4, yeah, the bishop could come back to f8, but maybe even better, bishop e7. And that attacks this pawn, so queen e2. Now either bishop g5, it looks pretty comfortable for black, or even bishop f6, which means it's going to be difficult for white to get in d4. And who knows, later on maybe knight f4 is possible, and then that bishop kind of rakes down the diagonal, or, well, black can hang back for the time being, but, you know, moves like bishop e6 are coming, b6, whoops, not b5, b6 covers lots of squares, and bishop e6. Seems to me black is very, very comfortable in that position. So let's come back here. So before that bishop ran away, Carlsen decided, okay, I'm going to exchange. But the position they've ended up in is really comfortable for black, and it's actually just like a reverse Spanish. So a4, d5. Now, if we just try and reverse the colours, you'll notice that just like in the Spanish, this knight has come to g6. Imagine a knight going from b1 to d2 to f1 to g3, and then white gets in d4. Well, that's exactly what's happened here. So Karjakin has a greater share of the centre after this move d5. And he's better here. This is a nice position. And knight b3, yeah, Carlsen would like to sort of get some pressure here. You know, maybe tempt black into playing a6, which isn't good, gives up lots of squares. But b6 is an excellent move, blunting the bishop and taking away the c5 square. Even though after a5, black wants to keep that pawn on b6, rook b8. White does get control of the file, but actually it doesn't really matter that much. I think the important thing is that black is controlling the c5 square. I mean, it's possible for Carlsen to take and play rook a7. Not that this is going very far, but it would at least, I think black would probably just have to exchange pieces, which at least, damps down any attack on the king side. So that's a possibility. But Carlsen instead played queen c2. That's not really his style. He likes to keep the tension. But he's worse here, no doubt about it. Karjakin controls the center. And rook e7 covers the second rank. c4, quite a committal move from Carlsen. And Karjakin decides to just push on, and just as in the Spanish, Karjakin has a nice space advantage here, and f5 is the typical move in this kind of position. Basically, he wants to get through to the d3 pawn and open up the f file as well. So, for example, pawn takes, you can see that pawn on d3 is actually rather weak. Carlsen exchanges, and he holds firm on the king side with f3. Rook f7 switches to the f file, very logical, so that it might be possible to exchange and use the f file. Rook f1, Carlsen just covers here. And king h7, that's a clever move. I mean, it feels nice to tuck the king away, nice and safely on h7 anyway. But there is actually a specific tactical reason for playing like this. One idea for white is to play c5 in order to provoke this move, and then maybe rook and knight can get in and attack the pawn on c6. But after c5, let's come back here. c5, there is a problem. Black exchanges on e4, exchanges on f1, that drags the rook away. Bishop takes b3, and pawn takes pawn on c5, and there's a pin. That is the problem. And notice with the king on h7, there's no check. That's the specific reason why he played the king to h7. So, e takes f5 from Carlsen. Committal decision, but I can understand why, it's tough for white to wait here. There's no clear plan for white. But now there's always a little bit of pressure here. Bishop e1. I think around here Carlsen must have miscalculated something, because after queen g5 threatens queen e3, and don't forget knight f4 as well. This is rather uncomfortable. So rook d1, bit passive, having to cover that, and h5. So that introduces this possibility of advancing here. Bishop d2, queen h4. Rook e1, and now a little finesse from Karjakin. Rook a8, taking the open file, and after Carlsen challenges, then the rook switched back to f8, so he's basically distracted the rook from e1, which is, I guess, on a better position than a1, and just built up on the f file. Now Carlsen could wait here, let's say bishop c1, but typically, he wants to play actively. Carlsen doesn't like waiting passively. Plays the rook to a6, attacking this pawn, and possibly looking to play c5 as well. So this brings matters to a head. And in fact, he played this having calculated quite deeply, as we're going to see. Carlsen, I should say, was running quite short of time. Time control, both players get 2 hours, and that's all the time they have. But after move 40, they get 10-second increment per move. But that's a lot of pressure, actually. So the best move here is queen d8, just to hold that pawn. And if c5, actually black can go on the attack straight away, knight h4. And if pawn takes pawn, Bishop h3. This is incredibly strong, and this just breaks through here. Let me show you in another form. Rook takes b6, bishop h3. Again, same thing. Let me just show you a little bit further. It's actually not very sophisticated. Basically, black breaks in just by sheer weight of numbers here. You know, these pieces are just across the other side of the board. And here, queen d5 is absolutely crushing. Yeah, here's a nice tactic, actually. Queen c4, knight, discovered check, queen takes queen, and rook f1 mate. There we go, that's sweet. Okay, let's come back. Rook a6 just played. And Karjakin played, instead of queen d8, he played a move which looks really inviting. You know, he wants to break open the f-file. And this feels so thematic. But this is what Carlsen had been calculating very carefully. And he discovered a little trick. So if, let's say, d takes e4, then that can be taken. Of course, there's a pin here. And black is breaking through. Or f takes e4, bishop g4. And, well, after this exchange, black is getting in here. Or if rook a1, all the rooks can be exchanged. And queen h2. I mean, this is not complicated. Knight h4 to follow, and g2 is going to cave in. But after e4, Carlsen had calculated knight takes d4. This is the game continuation. E takes f3, knight takes f3. And now Karjakin played bishop h3, which looks like a bone-crushing move. You can see all black's pieces in play. Beautiful. And if knight takes queen, rook takes rook, mate. Or pawn takes bishop, just takes on f3, and black is crashing through to the king. Bishop h3 just looks like the end of the show. But Carlsen had prepared a response here. Rook f2, it's the only move that actually keeps white in the game. And it's good enough. And this obviously shocked Karjakin. Probably, you know, Magnus running short of time. Under pressure, he thought he's going to crack. But rook f2, what a move. So, for example, if bishop takes g2, now it's possible to take here, but even better, knight g5 check. This is a winning move. And queen takes, just bishop takes queen. And rook takes, you can just take with the queen, winning endgame. Or king g8, knight takes rook. Basically, white is going to end up a rook up in this position. So rook f2 played, Karjakin sacked the exchange. Now, white's got to be careful here. If rook takes, check, king h1, and then queen f2. Black is in. So g takes f3. And it's remarkable that with just these pieces around the king, actually white is holding here. Even though black has 4 pieces attacking, there's actually no way to break through, or at least not very quickly. Karjakin tried rook f5. Now this is tricky. Got to watch out for this move. But Carlsen played an excellent move here. d4. Now that opens up this diagonal. So it basically means that, well, when black develops the attack, one of these pieces is going to be pinned. Queen takes d4. Rook a3, that's the other point of playing d4. It opens up the third rank, allowing the rook to come back to defend. So if knight h4 here, which looks quite dangerous, bishop g5, there we go. That uses this pin, the rook can't move, and white simply threatens to take the knight. Okay, let's come back. So rook a3, rook f7 played. Rook e3, which feels very chunky. My computer thinks that queen d3 is a better move. I'm sure it's right, but I think rook e3 is a very kind of understandable move when you're short of time. It just feels like white is sort of packing the king side, taking control of the e-file. Looks very sensible. Bishop f5, queen c3. Of course, black doesn't want a queen exchange. Queen d8, rook e1, defending the first rank. Bishop controls g5. I mean, I think it's clear that Carlsen is over the worst now. He's the exchange up. Still a tricky position, but his pieces have packed the center. He's okay now. This is a better move to drive the queen back and then just to repeat the position. And black might well hold that position, but still, that would be a success for Carlsen. But instead, Karjakin played rook d4, allowing queen g5, and that forces a queen exchange because both these pieces are attacked. So Karjakin has a knight and a pawn for the rook. And at the moment his pieces aren't that bad, but actually he collapsed really quickly here, uncharacteristically so. Carlsen mentioned after the game he thought knight f4 was the best move, but this still looks very difficult for black after rook c1. If the bishop has to retreat, that's pretty miserable. White still has good winning chances there. But Karjakin played b5, and that's definitely a mistake. King f2. Pawn exchange, and now rook c1. Which, well, basically, in these kind of positions, if you can exchange rooks when you're the exchange up, then that's your half the battle, basically. So Karjakin tries to keep the rooks on, but rook d2, it's chasing that rook. If bishop d3, that kind of self-pins, and just h4 holding the bishop. With rook d1 or rook c3 coming, doesn't look great for black. And if rook e5, I think the problem here is that the rook will come to c7, and it's going to be possible to target the g7 pawn very quickly, and that is really dangerous. Rook number 2 could also come in very easily. So in this position, after rook d2, Karjakin decided to exchange and play knight e5, but this is lost after the rook exchange. Again, Carlsen targets g7, bishop c3 coming. Now it's lost. This pawn drops, and now Karjakin even blundered a piece. Rook e7. Skewer, and after this, chase the knight, 2 pieces attacked. Well, bishop f5 would have held on for a bit, but I think basically it would be possible to just pick up the b pawn and then attack g7, and it's going to be winning for white. So it doesn't actually lose a piece, but it loses a piece the way that Karjakin played with bishop c4, king d4, and basically this bishop runs out of squares. Has to protect the knight, and if here, then rook b7, and then rook here. And the bishop has to relinquish hold over the knight, and white is a piece up. What a turnaround from Carlsen. I mean, he was under massive pressure in that position. Round about here, this is a pretty rotten position. But he dug deep and so resilient, and found that fantastic defense with rook f2. He foresaw that a long time before. He said that actually he'd seen it before black played e4, which is pretty remarkable actually. But the way Karjakin collapsed at the end, well, maybe just the momentum was against him. And, it's very hard to hold back the tide. So with that victory, Carlsen leapt into the lead. with just one round to go. In the final round, Carlsen has black against Nepo. Wow, that's going to be a really intriguing battle. How hard will Nepo push? Could be a fascinating prelude to their match in November. And Rapport has black against Alireza Firuzja, who also won he won around 9 and has gone into the top 10 in the live rating list. Exciting times. Okay, I'll report back and let you know what happened in the final round. But I hope you enjoyed that anyway. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe. If you're not a subscriber, check out what's on the channel. There's loads of good stuff. And do consider supporting us via PayPal for a one-off donation. Or Patreon if you want to join the club. Check out the rewards you get there every month. Thanks for watching.